Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa from the Pikes Peak Library District, and I want to introduce Patricia Meredith, author of Butcher, Baker, Candlestick Taker. I didn't want to mess that up. And it's book one in her series, Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries. And she grew up in Buena Vista, Colorado, and tonight she's going to talk about her book and also the process of writing historical fiction. Thank you, Patricia. I'll hand it over to you now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Pikes Peak Library District for hosting this. And welcome to History to Mystery. Let's see, I've got a thing in the middle of my screen. There we go. Oops. Get things going. All right. So as Melissa said, my name is Patricia Meredith, and I'm the author of Butcher, Baker, Candlestick Taker, which is the first in the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries. And a little about me, we moved from Colorado to Spokane, Washington about 8 years ago. We had 2 kids, and it wasn't until they were 3 and 5 that I decided I wanted to make time to write. I've always wanted to be an author, but after college, I worked as an editor of science fiction and fantasy novels for a game company. But I did get to work with such New York Times bestselling authors as George R.R. Martin, Tracy Hickman, and William H. Keith, just to name a few. But after years as an editor, I wrote my first draft of Butcher Baker while I was pregnant with my son in Colorado, but I didn't get back to it until about 4 years ago. And that was when it went from being a murder mystery set in Wales and twisted fairy tales to something a little more like this. So as you can see, Butcher, Baker, Candlestick Taker is more of a historical mystery now. And if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, I'll try not to give anything away, but let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to pick up a copy, it is available in print, ebook, and audiobook to check out through your library, whether that's Pikes Peak or somewhere else. But I did check, and PPLD has it available in all 3 formats for you to check out. Libraries are incredible. And if you'd like to learn more about how libraries support authors, please visit my website because I have a whole blog about how awesome libraries are. You can also pick up a copy for your own. It's available in any format wherever books are sold. So speaking of which, where is everybody from? I don't know if everyone's from Colorado because this link did go out all over. So, and like I said, I'm speaking to you right now from Spokane, Washington, which is on the east side of the state, not on the west, not quite Seattle. As I'm speaking, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. And when I'm finished, I'll go through and answer them all. So some starting questions: what kind of research goes into writing an historical mystery? How do you decide what to use in the book? Does history itself inspire the story? Which came first, the research or the story? Well, I don't know about other authors, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what went into the writing of Butcher, Baker, Candlestick Taker and how it became the historical mystery that it is today. So I'll start with that last question. Which came first, the research or the story? And to be honest, like I said, this book actually started in a totally different place and time. However, once I set my heart on going historical mystery, everything fell into place. It's hard to believe this book ever began as something else. Once I dove into rewriting the first draft, the research and writing were so integral, it wasn't a matter of researching and then writing, but more of a back and forth, a push and pull. It was important to me that throughout the books, I really wanted to stay true to Spokane's history, including people, locations, and events. More on why I chose Spokane in a minute. But I ended up dividing my research between 4 central areas. Got hands-on research, first-hand accounts, second-hand research, and finally, expert readers. So I'll start with the hands-on research. And what I mean by that is going in person to places and actually touching places and things from that time period that I was researching, which was 1901. But to start, I ended up at the Campbell House. Yep, there we go. So the Campbell House is a house that's built in 1898, and it's here in Spokane, Washington, and you can walk through it. It's kind of like a living museum. It's been refitted with all the trappings of the home circa 1910, and it's available for visits and tours. In fact, much of the accoutrement inside, a lot of the decorations, the tea set, things like that, they actually track down through history the actual pieces that belonged in this house that were owned by the Campbells, that were sold to other people and made it through history back to the Campbell House. So it's pretty cool. I also wanted to mention that my audiobook narrator, Rebecca Cook, she plays Huldah, the Campbell's cook at Christmas. So she is totally tied into this book and to this series and to this house. In fact, she even calls it my house. So the Campbell House ended up being the perfect inspirational location for a story set in Gilded Age Spokane, and therefore was a major inspiration when designing Miss Mitchell's mansion home, which is the main home in Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker. It also led to the Campbell family themselves getting featured in the second book, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Finish up here. There's some amazing, they've found like Edison light bulbs to go in, the car, the automobile. There's just so many wonderful things in this house. But what really inspired it was this door. And you might be thinking, what is this little piece of metal outside the house? Well, the docent, when I took my first tour of the Campbell House, she pointed out this door and she said it was a wood chute for the groundskeeper. He would chop wood or have it ordered in and then deliver the wood via the chute to the basement where the furnace was stored, and then along with stacks and stacks of cordwood. And I pointed out there's no lock on it. And she said, well, the door at the bottom of the shaft is locked on the inside. But I kept thinking about this character called the Red Rogue, who was a thief that I had featured in the very first draft of my mystery. And the Red Rogue made it into the book. So here's an excerpt. The thief made straight for the door at the bottom of the wood shaft, designed for sliding cordwood down to be collected beside the furnace. Red had quite happily discovered that a thin thief was the same size as a bundle of wood, and now passed through what had been a locked door at the bottom of the shaft, most likely in place to deter such things from happening, but nothing a quick lockpick couldn't handle, and locked the door once again. Then up the shaft, Red carefully climbed, stopping only once to unsnag the hem of the burgundy overcoat from splinters of wood. So that's just an example of how going and seeing something in person inspired a scene in the book. And the whole book is like that, and the sequels are even more so. So then after that, I ended up going to a railroad museum, and that led me kind of towards the clock tower. And you can see the clock tower in the top left-hand picture there, still attached to the depot. Today, it's not attached to the depot anymore, but I'll show pictures of that later. But this was another place where I got to walk through actual trolley cars and trains of that time period, and all the while I'm getting more and more inspired. Then I also went repeatedly to Manitou Park, which if you read the book, you'll notice that it is called Montrose Park in the book, because I discovered in my research that the name wasn't changed until 1904. And so in 1901, it was Montrose Park. Today it's Manitou Park. And it's one of my favorite places to walk around and take pictures and just be inspired. And so I have several scenes with my characters where they go to the park and are having conversations there, because it's a beautiful way of showing the changing of time through the city, as well as different things are blooming throughout the year. And then, of course, simply walking downtown. And so there in the top left corner is me with the clock tower behind me. That's the clock tower downtown in Riverfront Park now. And all that remains is the clock tower, not the depot anymore. But it is one of the symbols of Spokane, of this city. When you go downtown, you can't help but see it. And it's on, postcards and I think it might even be on some license plate, bumper stickers, things like that. It's kind of the symbol of Spokane. So I was really drawn towards that. And I kept thinking, what can I feature in my book about the clock tower? And it all fell into place. So I found plenty of inspiration for the foundation of the story, the setting, but I didn't have a specific date yet. I just knew I wanted it set in the turn of the century because I've been fascinated with a Edwardian time period for a long time. It probably started with the American Girl doll books. Samantha was who I had, and she's 1904. And then, of course, Anne of Green Gables, which was published in 1908, which is another book that I would love to talk about in my books, but it hasn't been written yet. So, but I still get to dress like her. I love Anne, Anne with an E. So next I turn to firsthand accounts. Firsthand accounts is anything written by people who actually lived and breathed and saw Spokane in my time period. So I put the call out and somebody pointed me in the direction of Dear Mother. And this was another incredible resource. Turns out Dear Mother is a collection of letters sent home by Marinus Cromlin from Spokane in 1901 to his mother, who was in Amsterdam. And he just happened to be in Spokane in 1901, which is the time period I was looking for. Not only did he write these incredibly descriptive letters home from an outsider's point of view of the city. So, he's going to notice things that Spokaneites won't really notice. But he also was a photographer. And so all of these pictures were taken by him of the city at that time. And in some of them, you can see the clock tower in the background. You can see the inside of people's homes, people actually sitting there in their dresses, the firemen. It was so inspirational. Because of his letters and his pictures, that's actually why one of my main characters, Marion, she has gutta percha boots, which is something that was mentioned in one of his letters. He talks about buying gutta percha boots and how comfortable they are and how quiet they are. So I had her wearing those. And then I also made her a photographer. And actually her name is Marion, and I had named her that before I met Marinus Cromlin, but it ended up being one of those happy accidents of research and history. So then by this time I was feeling like 1901 was going to be my time period. And that's when I started looking at Spokesman Review articles, which Spokesman Review is the newspaper here. And that was when I discovered the clock tower. And I was like, oh, it's perfect, because the clock tower was built in 1901, from 1901 to 1902. And I've included a whole list of articles detailing the building of it from beginning to end on my website. And that is going to be the backbone of my series, which I decided to call the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries. The books will span from April 15th, April 15th, 1901, which is when Butcher Baker takes place. And then the second book takes place in May, 1901. And so you'll see there's a pattern going. The third book takes place in June, and it continues. So we'll end with the dedication of the clock on June 20th, 1902. So as you can tell, I have a plan of 12 books right now. We'll see what else history throws my way and see if anything else gets added. But one of the things I noticed was that the designer of the clock tower was listed as Seth Thomas, which is a company in Connecticut. It doesn't necessarily mean that Seth Thomas himself designed the clock that would go into the clock tower. So I thought, okay, I'm going to put a character in there, and that's how I'm going to sneak into history with my story. So I made up Archie Prescott, who is the designer of the clock for the tower, and he has come all the way from Connecticut, and mayhem ensues and murder ensues. And from there, it just kept trickling down until each of my characters was so connected to Spokane, it was clear this was where the story belonged. So now I had a time and place, and I went back to the archives with more specific questions. It was there I was pointed to the Polk City Directory for 1901 and 1902, which provided actual addresses and locations of people and places in Spokane. and ads. Ads are the best because then I can advertise, oh, my character needs a clock. And so where would they go? They go to Shopton Riordan on 403 Riverside Avenue, and they can even telephone them at West 543, and all because of an ad I found in the Spokane City Directory. So in addition to the city directory, I relied heavily on 2 books that were written at that time period. The History of Spokane County by Jonathan Edwards, which was published in 1900. And that helped me describe people and places from my time period as well. And then The History of the City of Spokane and Spokane County by N.W. Durham, which was published in 1912. So with his book, I have to take into account, okay, some of this is written later. And so there might be things that he'll mention that I have to make sure I compare to other notes and not mention anything that hasn't been put in place yet by 1901. But in this way, I was able to populate my story with real people from history, like the patent lawyer, L.L. Westfall, and coroner Nathan M. Baker, both of whom you can read more about on my website. And they will be recurring characters. So far, they've made it into the first 3 books. We'll see if they make it past that. The coroner obviously will, but Westfall, we'll see what happens in the future storylines. And then all the police outside of my 2 main characters, I made up the twins, Bernard and Thomas. But everybody else that they interact with are real men who worked on the force at that time in 1901. And that just makes it so much fun to describe the other detectives they're working with and the other people they're interacting with. So we've got like Chief Witherspoon is in the center of the photo. He's got the fork beard, the French fork beard. That would be the chief. And then the man in the bowler hat, so all the plainclothes ones, those are all the detectives. We've got McDonald, McDermott, what's the other one? It's all Mick something. And then Burns is the last one, Martin Burns, and he's the one in the bowler hat sitting down there who's not actually looking at the photographer. And then the man who's kind of slouching in the chair off to the right, that's actually the commissioner, Lilienthal. It's interesting because old photographs, they show they're telling a story, and they were also considered an art piece. And so you've probably heard, oh, people didn't smile in photographs because it took so long to take the photograph. And actually that's not true. It might have started that way when photographs took a while to be taken, but by this time, by 1901, I've got Marion uses a box camera that is a point and click. She has points and clicks. And I've actually been able to hold a camera that was made in 1900 and is exactly the one that she would have used. And it's very simple. And it wouldn't have taken them long to take a photograph at all. So through my research, what I've actually discovered is the reason they didn't smile is because they considered it art, and art was serious. And so you didn't smile in a photograph. And it actually took some Asian influence. When the Chinese came over, they would smile in their photographs because that's what you did in China, was you smiled for photographs. And it just slowly incorporated into our culture. So that's something we got from them. And it has become, I mean, I always smile in photographs. I still know people who don't smile because they think it's a serious thing. So there you go, little tidbit there. Also at the archives, I found the Sanborn Maps. A Sanborn map is a fire map. So they would have drawn the building and where the water was nearby. And through that, I'm able to describe, you can see the Great Northern Passenger Station is written on the left-hand one. And then on the right, we've got the city hall, city jail, fire department, police department, which were all combined. And that's in the lower right. And then the county courthouse in the top right. And that's been really fun because then I can have them actually walking through doors and I know exactly where everything is, even if I don't have pictures of the inside, which it's very rare to find photographs of the inside of buildings at that time because the lighting was not very good. Those Edison lamps, as you can see, the photographs of the Campbell House, a lot of them are dim. That's because those are my personal photographs and they've got it lit just like the time period. So there's not a lot of indoor photographs, but the Sanborn maps help a lot in bridging that gap. I also found diaries and cookbooks. Cookbooks are amazing. I have a whole collection of them. I started up here of cookbooks written circa 1901. And with those, I actually tend to go more towards the ones that are written in 1890 to 1900. because they would have, the cookbooks that I own on my shelf, most of them were given to me by my mom or by my husband's mom. They've been passed down through the generations, and those are the ones I turned to first, not the one that was printed this year. And so I try to keep that in mind when I'm pulling facts and pulling recipes for my characters. So again, anything that they cook in the books is taken directly out of a cookbook. Anytime they're cleaning things, I take it right out of a cookbook, because cookbooks at that time didn't have just recipes. They also had things worth knowing, and ways to clean things and etiquette, and they're full of wonderful things, which I have a lot more about that on my website. And I also do a presentation just on cookbooks. So if you want to hear more about that, let your library know, and I will come and tell you more about that, because it's so much fun flipping through cookbooks. So I also found diaries and letters, oral histories. They've actually gone back and recorded. They recorded some of the people who grew up with the Campbells, and or they remember their grandmother talking about it, and interviewing servants of that time, things like that. And that is all hugely inspirational. And they're all from 1901. I try to do 1901 and then a little bit before that to inspire anything that I'm writing. So that's always fun. So from there, I moved on to secondhand research. And that would be more like nonfiction historical research to fill in all the gaps and to get even more inspiration. And a lot of the secondhand research would often, they include a bibliography in the back. And so then that would lead me back to firsthand research. Whenever I had two sources that disagreed, I would always go with what was printed in 1901 or prior, which sometimes might not actually be the most accurate. The newspapers misprinted and misquoted constantly. Or they embellished the truth quite a bit, and had opinions on things. And so sometimes I have to take that into account, but I do try to go with what was said, like in the newspaper or in a letter at that time, because at least it's the opinion of that day versus us pushing our modern day opinions onto history. So this included books like Life Behind the Badge, which was a huge one. That's where I got my photograph of my policemen and all their names. And then McPhee, that was the other detective. McPhee, McDonald, Burns, and McDermott, who you can see pictured right down there in the lower right. I really wanted to feature the police force. I wanted to make them as accurate as possible for that time period, with a lot of new ideas coming in. At that time, one of the things that's mentioned in the Life Behind the Badge is the idea that like a blotter was a new idea, and it actually didn't come really into use until 1902. So I might have to incorporate that in one of the later books. But they had like just recently set up telephones, which were police call boxes all across the city, and they had a direct line to the police station, so you could pick up the phone and call 911 basically. But that would be the only way to do it, would be to find one of these telephone boxes. So it's just interesting to think about how life was similar but different at that time. And a lot of that came out of this book regarding the police force. Not to mention all the other books I came across, and I've marked, as I said, for needing for future books, for future ideas. And websites. I even found a Google map. Someone had made a map of all of the what are they called? The streetcar routes through Spokane at that time period and a little bit after. So again, sometimes I have to compare with my notes from firsthand research whether that particular line was actually in effect in 1901, but the main ones were. And so I can have my characters hopping on the streetcar. I know exactly where they're headed. I know what stop they have to get off at, and what they would see around them. So I've made that into an interactive Google map, which you can go to my website and find. And then I've tried to been adding anything that comes up, any location that happens in the books, or where people live, where my characters live, where actual people from history live. If I find them in the city directory, then I can put their address in there and it pops up. And so you can actually see where people lived in the book at the time of the book compared to now. So you could even do a walking tour. If you ever came to Spokane, you could do a walking tour of the places that that are in my book. So there you go. So all of that led to the final thing, the most important thing, I think, was getting expert readers for my book. And expert readers would happen a few times throughout the writing process. With the first book especially, it was very much, I would kind of write a scene and then send it off to somebody and have them tell me, okay, so actually the police wouldn't do that, or they wouldn't say that at that time. Here, try this. So I have a police expert. I have a Spokane historical expert who's been helping me. And then I have a blacksmith and a Japanese culture expert and a clockworks expert. And those are my main 4 folks who read every single book and give me the go ahead and help me find the research that I need. And then depending on each book, I've had other added experts, but I can't tell you too much about those because it might give away what the plot is for some of the future books. But for example, my husband worked at a jewelry store at the time when I first wrote Butcher Baker. So he hooked me up with some very skilled and trained clockmakers, and we were able to look at the inside of clocks so that when I'm describing them for Archie, he knows what he's talking about. And it's all thanks to actual people who were able to show me and explain to me jewels and clockworks. It's amazing. And then Robert Sylvan was my main guy for blacksmithing. You might have actually seen him at the Ren Fair up in Larkspur. I love the Ren Fair in Colorado. It's one of the best things Colorado has to offer. And he has been to many Ren Fairs, and he goes to writing conferences across the country, and he shows off his skills as a blacksmith. From my time period and earlier, because of course Ren Fair, that would be even earlier. But it turned out that he was like an expert in blacksmithing in turn of the century. So it hadn't changed too much between 1700s and 1900s. And then he also, he had lived and studied in Japan, where he went to study Japanese history, specifically about blacksmithing. So I was able to make my blacksmith Japanese, Hayate Matsumoto. He's Japanese, but not only that, he's blind. So Robert Sylvan worked with me to figure out how would it work to have a blind blacksmith. That sounds like something so bizarre and so out there. It was necessary for the plot of Butcher Baker, which I won't give too much away with that, but I knew that I wanted a blind blacksmith. And it just worked out perfectly. We were able to talk it through, and many of the lines that Matsumoto says to explain how he does his work come straight out of Sylvan's mouth. He was able to explain to me how a blind blacksmith would actually be better at knowing when exactly to pull the metal out of the fire, because he could hear the heat change. And he could hear the sound of the fire and interacting with the metal, and there's this sound that happens. And we talked about working barehanded, would he have worn gloves? And he was like, no, he doesn't even wear gloves, because when you're blacksmithing, you want to have the feel, you want to be able to feel things. And so that means getting burned sometimes, but it's better to be able to handle the material and know, how hot it is or what you're actually touching. So rarely do blacksmiths actually wear gloves, which was another thing that I was like, oh, it's a good little tidbit. I'll add that in there. So thankfully, all of it helped making the blacksmithing possible and believable. So that's my last thing, is expert readers. And the rest is history or historical mystery. I could go on, all this to say that I really wanted to make sure my series was historically accurate where it needed to be, so that readers would be more likely to go with me on the parts that are fictitious. On the first book, I often became distracted by my research, falling down rabbit holes of information, or spending far too much time reading newspaper articles. They are fascinating. I love reading old newspaper articles. You can learn so much. And then that would end up with more research than I could possibly use. And so I ended up deciding that I was going to write a whole series about it. So I've got a whole list of ideas of locations and people and events and things that I've found in the newspaper, and how I'm going to extend that throughout the entire series. For example, one of the things I learned during a rabbit trail through newspaper articles was that President William McKinley, which this was his second term at that time in 1901, he was scheduled to visit Spokane and stay with the Campbells, so the house that I went to, the Campbell House, a couple weeks after the events of my first book. It happens at the end of May. And so guess what event essential to the plot of the second book? Cupboards All Bared. And what's interesting is McKinley was supposed to come. He ended up not coming because his wife got sick, and he had to cancel his plans. And but if you know from history, McKinley is one of the presidents that was assassinated. He was assassinated in September of 1901. So I was able to tie in a lot of that, a lot of echoes of history and things like that into what would have happened if he had come to Spokane, or should he maybe have not come to Spokane? Maybe it's a good thing he didn't come, because maybe something was going to happen. So all of that goes into Cupboards All Bared. So speaking of which, real quick, I did want to say that you can pre-order the book. It's available in print, ebook, and audiobook, and hopefully the PPLD will get a copy of it for you guys to check it out. This is the book 2 in the series, and like I said, I'm kind of hoping, well, I've got planned 12 books, not kind of hoping, it's going to happen. I've got 12 books, maybe more, planned for the series. So if you're along with me for the ride, it's going to be a bumpy one full of mayhem and murder, and it's going to be so much fun. So what kind of research goes into writing an historical mystery? All kinds. Hands-on research, first-hand accounts, second-hand research, and finally expert readers. How do you decide what to use in the book? It's difficult, but the things that don't make it in, I post about on my website, just in case someone is as interested in the history as I am. Does history itself inspire the story? Absolutely. Like I said, history caused me to rewrite that first draft of Butcher Baker, and then I was so inspired by the historical books and by the historical events that I've discovered through my research that I've planned 12 books. I'm actually working on book 4 right now, so that's how far into the series I'm at. So I'm going for it. Which came first, the research or the story? Both hand in hand. I often outline the book, research, and then go back and rework things based on what I uncover. So if you'd like to know more about my research, you can find more about all the things I mentioned in depth on my website at patricia-meredith.com. And I'm posting new stuff all the time. If you have a specific question, be sure to ask. I'll take those here in a second. So if you know people who appreciate historical accuracy when it comes to historical mystery, tell them about my book, Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, the first in the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries. And be sure to follow me as @PMeredithAuthor. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Goodreads, and I have a YouTube channel where I post more presentations and interviews and readings and all sorts of things. I'll be doing an unboxing next week of Cupboards All Bared. And you can visit my website, sign up for my newsletter. I post free short stories when you sign up for my newsletter. And always, you're welcome to email me at author@patricia-meredith.com if you have any specific questions. So that's all from me.
Thank you. That was really interesting. And I'm a fan of mysteries and I like historical fiction. So I have to put your book on hold because all of the copies are checked out.
Excellent. That's a good problem.
It is. It is. And so we did have a few questions in the chat. Sue wants to know more about what you're wearing.
Oh, yes. So I get my costumes, my outfits from Recollections. If you look up recollections.com or recollections.biz, it might be. They make costumes for like events, like there's a Somewhere in Time festival that happens at Mackinac Island. It happens every year, and they do like high-end costuming, but it's at a reasonable price. And so I've been able to purchase lots of different clothes from them. I love doing my hair. I felt my hair start going though as I started recording, but I try to put my hair up in the pompadour style. That's actually the hardest part of this whole outfit is putting the hair up. The rest of it is actually very comfortable. And I love wearing it and walking around town. And it's a great way to get people to ask me why I'm wearing that. And then I can tell them about my book. So.
Great. We had a question about, have you ever cooked a recipe from the old cookbooks you have?
Yes, and I posted 3 of them this last Christmas. I recorded myself cooking 3 of them. So those are on my YouTube channel, but I'm hoping to do more. And I've posted a couple of the recipes that are mentioned in the book. I put them as being made from characters in my book, but they come from recipe books up here. Mrs. Beeton's is probably the most recognizable one. Most people have heard of Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, but it's a British one. So then from there, I've been trying to find more local ones and American ones. This is one of the oldest ones. Yeah, but they're super fun to cook from. What's interesting about them is they often don't include the length of time to cook them or the heat at which to cook them. So you know how all of our recipes end with, cook at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 35 minutes. None of that is included. It's basically usually just a list of ingredients, and then you just have to use your personal knowledge to go from there. If they do mention the heat, it's like cook it at a medium heat or a high heat. And it's basically, you just have to understand, it's almost like doing a technical for a British baking show. You have to just know, all right, bread gets cooked at, somewhere around 450, maybe 500 degrees. So it's going to be a pretty hot oven. Whereas, cookies are going to be generally cooked, a cake are going to be generally cooked at 350, 375. So that's about a medium oven. And from there, you just have fun with it. You got to try it a couple times but they usually taste wonderful. It's amazing what they don't use and how good they taste. So.
Great. The next question is from me, from the librarian's point of view. As you were talking about your research, I wondered, did you do most of it at a public library, or did you go to the local academic libraries, or did you have to do interlibrary loan?
A lot of that, a lot of different things. Some of it was, I put a call out, there's a Spokane history buffs group on Facebook. And so I put a call out on there. And so some people would say, oh, well, I have this copy of this old book. Do you want it? And so that's how I ended up with The Dear Mother, was someone actually gave it to me. And then there is the local library, but they've been doing a lot of construction lately. So actually a lot of it has been, they've started scanning things and putting them online because of the pandemic, which has been a huge boon for all researchers everywhere, every library that scans stuff. Because now I can access things from the Philadelphia library, about things from there, or, I can find things without even leaving my home. I can do that. And then here there's the Ferris Archives, which is attached to the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, which is where the Campbell House is. And they have a whole archive that is strictly dedicated to collecting memorabilia and history from Spokane. So a lot of local families will donate, here I found this collection of letters in my basement. I don't know what to do with them. Here you go. Well, they're fascinating. They're wonderful. And I'm so glad they didn't just burn them or get rid of them. We've actually had that with some family things. My husband is born and raised here, and so his history goes back here. And we've come across things, and some family members are like, oh, just toss that. And we're like, no, we want it because it could be in a story. We could use it for a story in the future. So I've been able to do a lot of hands-on research that way with books. And then I found lately at a lot of thrift stores around here, I'm able to pick up some of the books that I was checking out every month from the library. And then now I have my own copies. So that's been wonderful to find those, because then I can mark them up. I've got highlights and Post-it notes and everything all through them. So.
Great. And I just want to give a plug for old city directories.
Yes.
If you ever, I don't know how many people are in Colorado Springs, but you should visit the Penrose Library and go to special collections. And it's just fascinating to look at an old city directory to see what was at an address, because you realize, hey, that building got torn down and something new's up there. So I was impressed that you used a city directory.
Oh, yeah, that's probably one of the best resources because like you said, it gives me the details of who is where, and I can have, the coroner's at his office. I know where his office was versus where he lived. And like I said, the ads are just amazing. So you can find, when I was trying to find, a restaurant for them to go to, I just went through the city directory and found something under restaurants. So.
And another question from Sue. She is wondering about the African-American gentleman in the police photo. Do you know anything about him?
Yes, that is Walter Lawson, and he was the first one on the Spokane police force. And he served for quite a long time. He was there, and I mean, well into his 50s or 60s. On my website, I have more about him, which actually I've been trying to feature him quite a bit, because he's important to some future events in Spokane. So I'm trying to get people to recognize who he is from the first 3 books, because in future things that'll happen in the series, they need to know who Walter Lawson is, and his wife Millie, who I found mentioned, and her cinnamon rolls. And so that actually plays a featured thing in there. I don't have her recipe for cinnamon rolls, but I'll be posting my own recipe for cinnamon rolls and saying that that's Millie's, or tying it back into her. But apparently she was known for baking these cinnamon rolls and bringing them to the police force, and everybody would dive in and have them, and maybe Walter got 1 or 2. So
Great. And a question from Jillian. It says, aspiring author with young kids here, how do you balance your time to fit writing in?
Carefully. It's a lot of asking for help and asking for someone to watch the kids, and taking time, making time. I had to realize that I needed to make time to write. And as hard as that is, it's gotten easier the older they've gotten. That's the biggest comfort, is even when they were 3 and 5, and I was like, okay, I want to be an author. I want to do this. How am I going to do this? Thankfully I was able to ask some family to watch them. And so I ended up with 1 day a week. So it started with just 1 day a week. I would get 4 hours to myself, and I would go sit in this tea shop, which is where I'm doing my book launch from book 2 here in town. Because it was my room of one's own. It was where I would go for 4 hours while a family member watched my kids, and 1 day a week. And that's how I wrote that whole book. And because it's amazing what you can get done in 4 hours when you're like, okay, I have 4 hours and that's it. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to get it done. And some of those 4 hours were taken up with research. And I'd go to the Ferris Archives or wherever and do things there. And then another 4 hours, and the next week I'd come back and I'd be sitting there and I'd be writing. If you're seriously considering it, I would strongly recommend reading Your Blue Flame by Jennifer Fullwiler, this one. And then she's also got another book called One Beautiful Dream. And I have that one sitting next to my bed because I love looking at it and reminding myself that it's okay as a mother to pursue my own dreams, to take time out to do that, it has made me a happier, kinder mother by having my own pursuits. I love being a stay-at-home mom, but I also love being an author. And that's one of the reasons I always wanted to be an author, was I figured I could do both. And it's been inspirational to my kids. My kids are writing their own books. That's something that they do constantly, is they'll show up with, oh, I've got a book now, mommy. And so now lately it's been, I want to record it. I want to do an audiobook recording because my husband records his own books. So it's been fun to see that inspiration for them. So.
And how old are your kids now?
Now they are 8 and 6. One of them will be turning 7 this summer. And so it's definitely, I mean, like right now, they're just off playing in their room, totally happy. So I love it. It's great.
Good. And that was the last question.
All
I don't
right.
know if you have any closing remarks before we wrap everything up.
Thank you for coming, and be sure to sign up for my newsletter and things like that. And then you'll be the first to hear about giveaways and about the new book. Yeah. Go out there and get Cupboards All Bared, because it's coming, and it's the next part of this wonderful series. It's gonna be it's gonna be so much fun. I'm so excited to keep going with this series and share more about Spokane history and just historical fiction and what an inspiration it can be into breathing life into history, and reminding us that we're not alone and it's all been done before, and somehow they survived. So we too will get through it.
Great. Well, thank you for your presentation and
Thank you.
your writing process. Everything was really good. And I now have to put myself on hold for your book. I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner.
And if you get a chance to listen to audiobook, I love the audiobook. The narrator is incredible. She breathes life, speaking of breathing life, she breathes life into the characters. I love listening to it. And I'm like, wow, I wrote that. That's wow.
Great. Great. I'll do that. I do like audiobooks, so maybe I'll get the audiobook. So, well, thank you, Patricia, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And I did record this program, so if you have friends who who missed it, they'll be able to see it on the PPLD YouTube channel. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.